Hello, I'm Sebastian Michael, and this is this Saturday's Sonnet. O thou, my lovely boy, who in thy power dost hold time's fickle glass, his sickle hour, who hast by waning grown, and therein showest thy lover's withering, as thy sweet self growest. If nature, sovereign mistress over wrack, as thou goest onwards still will pluck thee back, she keeps thee to this purpose, that her skill may time disgrace and wretched minutes kill. Yet fear her, O thou minion of her pleasure. She may detain, but not still keep her treasure. Her audit, though delayed, answered must be, and her quietus is to render thee. And this is the unbelievably touching and moving Sonnet 126, the last one of the Fair Youth sonnets. And for that reason alone, I'm a little bit sad, because that means that we are now at the end of this body of work that has taken us on such a very long and varied and incredibly fascinating journey. All is not yet told. There is another part of this story which we will come to. But for the time being, this really is it. This is the last one of the ones dedicated to the fair youth. Some people say that the poem may be addressed to an actual child. I think this is not likely. It sits extremely well within the sequence where it is. There's no reason to take the words, thou my lovely boy, literally meaning he's talking to a child. I, the poet, am talking to a child. But there may be good reasons why addressing my lover of 3.5, maybe coming up to 4 years now, I at this point address him as the very young man I first met. And they are pure speculation, which is why I'm not actually going to go into them. I'm kind of opening up this whole possibility, and I'm not really actually going to explain it in great detail here, but it's really for another maybe place for that to be discussed in detail, what the layering of Sonnet 126 may or may not be. I think it's extremely poignant. I think that it may well, depending on the timing, and we haven't decided on a timing for these sonnets because we haven't actually decided on who the recipient of the Fair Youth sonnets is yet. And next episode I will dedicate entirely to that particular question, so I'm not going to leave it completely hanging there. But there's a possibility that the timing of this sonnet either coincides or follows relatively soon after the death of Hamlet, my son, my Shakespeare's son. And it's interesting that the sequence of sonnets addressed to the young man ends on such an extremely poignant, pensive and caring note. And this is as far as I will go. I won't be able to go further into this because we are here in the realm of pure speculation. As you know, the approach that I'm taking with these sonnets is to listen to the words, and what the words have to say themselves, and simply draw our conclusions from them. And everything or anything I'll be saying about this particular proposition goes way beyond that. It's pure conjecture, and so I'm going to leave it at that. But the sonnet is no doubt one of the most moving, touching, personal ones, and I think, as if it needed to, it puts paid absolutely to any suggestion that these sonnets are just an exercise in writing. It's another example of an extremely personal note that is being struck. And it does something unique in the sequence in that it misses the final concluding couplet. It's the only one that does that. And it seems to be doing so deliberately. There's another thing we don't know for certain. We don't know for certain whether the two brackets at the end of the sonnet that mark out the space where ordinarily there would be the closing couplet, whether these are just purely set by the printer to say, here we would normally have a couplet, but we don't have one because the writer hasn't given us one. Or are they purely set there by the printer to say, here we would normally have a closing couplet, but I'm not putting it here for reasons I'm not going to tell you about. Or has Shakespeare in his manuscript, in the handwritten sonnet that has passed to the printer, put brackets with space in between to denote here is where ordinarily in this format I would be writing a closing couplet, but I'm not going to because I don't want to. I have my own reasons. This remains incomplete, and this incompleteness may or may not symbolize something. Or has the printer received from whoever submitted these sonnets to him, and this may well not have been me the poet, this may very well have been somebody else, has the printer received these sonnets with the manuscript, with the final couplet deliberately removed or crossed out or blanked out or censored, if you like, by not the writer nor he himself the printer, but by the intermediary, by the person who has passed this into the hands of the printer. This could be the case. It could well be the case that, as some people have suggested, the final couplet of 126 contains too revealing, too personal information that would make it absolutely clear, for example, who this young man is, and that for reasons of privacy, of confidentiality, so to speak, the person who found it fit to pass the sonnets into the hands of the printer found it not fit to include within the work this particular component. We don't know. And I am not going to speculate, because I have absolutely no basis on which to speculate. Everything we know about the sonnets does not tell us what the reason is why Sonnet 126 has a couplet missing. I like the fact, in fact I love the fact, that 126 of all the sonnets in the canon has the final couplet missing. I like to think that this is deliberate on the writer's, on the poet's part, but I have no idea whether it is. All I can do is point it out, and it's really, really noteworthy. It is so very, very unusual. So, what does it mean, Sonnet 126? O thou, my lovely boy, who in thy power dost hold time's fickle glass, his sickle hour. You, my lovely boy. I agree with those editors who say that my lovely boy is an absolutely acceptable expression to a long-term lover, very close friend, my lovely boy. This is such an endearing way of addressing him. I don't think this is in the least surprising, by the way. Time's fickle glass is either the hourglass, which is fickle because it is ever-changing, it never stands still, it runs through your hands, metaphorically speaking, it keeps changing. Or it could also be a mirror, the metaphorical mirror of time, i.e. today, your looks today, you hold them in your hand. I leave it to you which way you want to interpret that. There is no set way. But you, my lovely boy, hold this glass, be that the mirror of today's appearance, in your hand. This would make sense because you don't seem to be growing old very much. Although in a previous sonnet I've told you that you are actually growing older even if you don't show it. But I have told you don't show it. So we can still assume that even though these years have passed, you don't seem to age. You're still as young and as beautiful to me as you first were when I first met you, is what I told you before. You hold this this glass in your hand, or if it's the hourglass, you hold that in your hand, meaning you are able to manipulate, meaning you are able to seem to be able to hold time, because by not turning over the hourglass, you appear to make it stop the passing of time. His sickle, his being time is personified with a capital T here. His sickle, the sickle is the scythe again. We've had this before many occasions. Time is personified as the cutter down of everything that exists. Ultimately, everything falls victim to the knife of time, to the scythe, to the sickle of time. Hour, meaning you even hold time's hour in your hand. This would again go hand in hand with the idea of holding the hourglass in your hand. In brackets there, if you're interested in these kinds of things, there are people who remove the comma between sickle and hour and think it must refer to his sickle hour. This is not a standing expression, but it could be interpreted as the hour that is in itself the sickle, because the hour as it passes 1 hour after the other over time cuts things down. And another possible interpretation would be the sickle hour being the hour in the autumn when you go and cut down the wheat or whatever it is that grows in the field, meaning it's the hour of death. I don't think this speculation is particularly necessary, because in the quarto that we have there's a comma there, and that makes perfect sense as it is. Who hast by waning grown, and therein showest thy lover's withering, as thy sweet self growest. The waning is, of course, the metaphor is from the moon that wanes, but we all wane towards our death. The moment we are born, arguably, we move towards our death. Or maybe it's fairer to say that we wax into adulthood and then we wane from adulthood into death. It's probably actually a nicer way of putting it, and also a more sensible way, because we grow up, we reach full maturity, and then we start to wane towards death. So in the process of waning, in the process of reaching maturity and beginning to wane, you have actually grown in stature, in status, in beauty, possibly also a little bit of a reference there, a sexual reference. We don't know. Shakespeare is quite fond of his puns, as we know, we've mentioned this before, and the lover's withering may also be a pun. It's entirely possible, even within a tender, beautiful and gentle sonnet like this, to still have that. But certainly the meaning on the surface is that you, even as you now move beyond the peak of having reached full maturity, and you are now in the process of waning, you still grow more beautiful, you still acquire greater status. And in doing so, you just show off how your lovers are decaying quickly by comparison. You show up the comparative age of your lovers. Here, the way we have the sonnet, it's lovers in plural with no apostrophe, either for the plural or for the singular. It could well be that there is an apostrophe missing. This would not be unheard of, that a comma or a punctuation mark or something goes missing. So it could be that what I'm actually saying is you're showing up particularly this lover's withering. If nature, sovereign mistress over wrack, nature herself, again personified, is the sovereign mistress. She's the queen who reigns over wrack, over decay. If she, in her position as the sovereign mistress over wrack, as thou goest onwards, as you grow older, as you go into and beyond maturity and towards old age, still will pluck thee back, if still hold you back. She keeps thee to this purpose, that the purpose for her doing so, that her purpose for doing so, her reason for doing so, is that her skill, her ability to do so, may time disgrace and wretched minutes kill. So she does it to disgrace time and wretched minutes kill There is, in all seriousness, no obvious explanation for this part of the line, but we get a sense for it. I think this is the beauty of poetry, that even if you can't quite rationally explain what it means, and here we actually can't, we get a clear sense of what is meant by it. If nature holds you back, she gets the upper hand over time, and she manages that way, if you like, to kill the wretched minutes that would otherwise be cutting you down minute by minute, as the hours do, as the years do. And in actual fact, there is quite a bit of argument about whether this is in fact the right word, whether it should be minutes, because in the quarto edition it is in the singular, wretched minute kill, and that doesn't make any sense to us really. Some people have argued it may mean wretched minuit, which would be the French word for midnight kill. Midnight could be interpreted or understood to be the dead of night, in other words, death, and if nature holds you back, then she kills death, at least for the time being. That doesn't really make very much sense either, and I've seen a lot of editions that seem to prefer the wretched minutes kill version of the line. I think we get a sense for it. Yet fear her, O thou minion of her pleasure. Be afraid still, fear her. I mean, be afraid as in respect her, to be wary of her still, of nature. O thou minion of her pleasure, you plaything, you servant. This is a wonderful, again, double meaning, certainly, that being the minion of her pleasure, the word pleasure in there is so wonderfully evocative, but also you are, of course, at the sovereign's pleasure by virtue of the fact that you are a subject, a subordinate to the sovereign. She may detain, she, nature, may detain, she may keep you back, but not still, even so, not keep her treasure. You are her treasure. Her audit, though delayed, audit is the reckoning, is the final settling of accounts. Her audit, though delayed, answered must be. She may be able to delay it, she may be able to hold you back, but not forever. There comes a point when even nature has to pay her dues. And her quietus, the reckoning, if like the final settlement of her accounts. It's been pointed out that in Shakespeare's day you would write on a settled account quietus or quietus est, I believe, meaning that it is settled, it is now all done and dusted. And her quietus is to render thee, is to hand you over. Even you. And I can barely bring myself to think the thought. You are so beautiful and so lovely and so adorable and alive, and even you will die. Bear that in mind. And that's my closing note to my loved one, my lover. This is how I conclude the sequence. And the reason I like the idea so much that the final two brackets are not an omission that happened accidentally, or a redaction, in other words, a deletion of lines that are there but that have been taken out to preserve somebody's identity, to preserve somebody's privacy. The reason I like the idea of this being put there by me, the writer, by Shakespeare, is because it's almost like the space on the page, and therefore the time in the brain, to think through the implication of this. But the implication sounds too abstract, sounds too theoretical. Just the resonance of this. If your lover says to you, you are my lovely boy, and you are still so unbelievably gorgeous, and just please be aware that even your time will pass. I'm not saying make the most of it now, or be careful how you spend your time, or be cautious in how you expend your love, or anything. It's just it's an incredible putting there of the thought of mortality, which to my mind surely must be informed by my own thought of my own mortality. I've made a big deal of my own mortality in this sequence so far. And if I have put these brackets there deliberately, and if I have written this sonnet with these two lines missing, then I think it makes perfect sense to assume or accept or entertain the notion that I have written this sonnet and deliberately not written these two lines, knowing that these will be the last of this kind, of this sequence. It's like the epilogue in a Shakespearean drama, where we've had acts 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Then sonnet 126 would be the epilogue. How did we get here? We skipped that step a bit because I got so excited about talking about the sonnet itself, but how did we get there? Let's briefly follow the line through for the sake of completion. How did we get from last week's batch to this ending? Remember where we left off. Well, last episode was "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments," and this followed hard on the heels of "Alas, 'tis true, I have gone here and there." So we know that there was a confession, if you like, I admitted to having played around, and then I asserted that that is nothing compared to what we have. What we have is a marriage of true minds. And this love that we have does not alter when its alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. No, it is an ever fixed mark. In other words, I am here, I am with you still. We have as good as a marriage of true minds. And then after that, I revisit the fact that I have frequent been with unknown minds, and I give in 117 a slightly convoluted argumentation that by being with these people, that kind of proved my love for you even stronger. That proved that you are that you are the only person that really matters, that you are the most important person. I do the same thing more or less with 118, where I use a little bit of a convoluted logic, it has to be said, to effectively justify myself. 119, what wretched errors have mine heart committed? The theme continues. I won't go into any detail here because that would be going too far, but this distress, on the one hand, at having offended against the young lover and seeking a kind of redemption, and also insisting that what I and you have is stronger and more powerful and more important. That's the tenor, definitely. And then in 120, that you were once unkind befriends me now. The slightly strained logic continues here. It makes some sort of sense. Look, you've done wrong things. You've done things that are wrong before. You have gone behind my back. You have slept around. You have betrayed me in the past, and I've forgiven you. Now this time round, you must do the same for me. And then 121, really interesting. "'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed, when not to be received reproach for being." And what comes back into the equation is what other people are saying, is this rumour mill, this slander that's abroad, these wagging tongues that we've had so many times before. And they seem to be taking over that, because here I am again making an assertion in "Let me not to the marriage of true mind admit impediments." I made an assertion. And here I say, no, I am that I am, and they that level at my abuses reckon up their own. I am that I am is not a magnificent number by, I can't remember who sings it, I am that I am, but I am needs no excuses. It's a biblical phrase. It is the Lord God says, I am that I am. It's a very, very strong statement for somebody to say, I am that I am. And these people who level at my abuses, these people who are counting up my failings, the crimes or the misdemeanors or the sins that I've committed or the transgressions, what they're actually doing is reckoning up their own, they're listing their own. It's another way of saying, do not throw with stones if you're in a glass house. And then we have 112, which is quirky, odd and slightly weird, where I seem to be talking about thy gift, thy tables, which are within my brain. Now this is normally interpreted as tables like booklets or notebooks, and they appeared before. I don't know whether you remember this. You may not remember this because it was it seemed to be going in passing, but if this is to be understood literally, if you take this literally, then this could actually be a case that Shakespeare, gave the young man some empty tables, some empty books for him to note down his feelings, his poetry, his letters to me, his responses to my sonnets, who knows, and that he has given them back to me and that I have given them away. And I now, in 122, explain that I've had good reason to do so because they are all in my brain. I can remember them all. I don't need these notes that you've given me. It's a little bit odd, to be honest, because it doesn't seem quite fit into the otherwise very serious tone at the moment. But 122 on its own seems to suggest that I have misplaced or given away or been nonchalant with something that he, the young man, has given me, namely writing of his. And this offers up an interesting additional perspective or thought which we have never really explored, and which I would love to explore in much more detail, but that's almost a separate series of it, a mini series of video blogs and podcasts on its own, which is, well, what is this young man saying all the time and how he's responding? Could it be that he writes sonnets back? Could it fancifully even be that some of these sonnets are actually responses? I level with you straight away. I do not know what the scholarly view is on this. I have not examined that. I've never seen anybody actually argue that. And this is interesting because I've read quite a bit about these sonnets and delved into them quite a bit. But interesting, nobody seems to suggest that, and I wouldn't suggest so either. But I find it an interesting thought that hasn't maybe fully been thought through. Not necessarily are any of these sonnets written by the young man, but what is the young man saying and how he's responding to all this? How does he communicate back? What are the responses we get? 122 stirs that thought up a little bit. 123, no time, thou shalt not boast that I do change. Similar to Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds, I do not change. I am steadfast in my devotion to you, in my love for you. Time, you cannot alter me. This I do vow, and this shall ever be. I will be true, despite thy scythe and thee. Again, the scythe, the cutting knife of time. Time is not changing me, and not my love to you. And then 124. 124 almost seems to directly address a question that does present itself to us today and would certainly have presented itself to people of the time, which is, are you just hanging about with this young man, not only because he's beautiful and you fancy him, that would be one thing, or two things combined into one, but because he is so very powerful, so very close to the seat of power. And 124 appears to address this and appears to directly say, no, if that were the case, then I would probably be fickle in my devotion and I would have come and gone, but that is not the case. My love was builded far from accident. It stands hugely politic. It nor grows with heat nor drowns with showers. Again, an assertion that it is of a different kind, it is of a lasting kind, and it is genuine and of substance. And then 125 may almost serve as a hint, more than a hint, it may almost serve as an explanation for why maybe after all this relationship is now, if not at an end, then no longer written about. I think it's at an end, frankly. Certainly the kind of relationship that it is. If the person who I think is the young man, then the contact between these two men does not cease entirely, but the intensity of the relationship now appears to be at an end. The sonnets written to him come to an end. And the last two lines of 125 may give us an indication why it has finally come to pass, that this is so. In the context of 124 and all the previous ones, of course, these ups and downs, they're not just random ups and downs, they are ups and downs that are in the eye of the public. They are my betrayals, my playing around, the fact that people are talking about this relationship you're having with me, the fact that I bring scandal into the relationship, the fact that you are no longer just an extremely rich, wealthy and well-connected young man. You have now reached full maturity. You may well have to pursue your responsibilities now. It may now simply be too dangerous and too untenable for us to continue to be seen in this relationship together. It seems to me as if the outside world is now simply overbearing and matters now must take their own course in relation to this man's life, and I am powerless against this. And no matter how much I assert that my love is steadfast, that I will not leave you, that I have done my philandering, that you are the home of love, all of this in a way now comes to naught. And the last ditch attempt for it not to be so comes in 125. Hence, thou suborned informer, a true soul, when most impeached, stands least in thy control. And this suborned informer is not the young man. This is the outside person, the gossiper, the spy, what today would be we're talking about the equivalent to the tabloid journalist. Either that, or indeed maybe even the Queen's actual spies. We know for certain that the Queen has an active secret service, the equivalent to an active secret service. And here I'm telling this person who is passing judgment, comment on our relationship, but also who seems to be passing information about us up to higher instances or to the outside world. I tell them, a true soul at the time when he is most impeached is least in your control. Very unfortunately, I think I'm proved wrong. I think the fact that here the fair youth sonnets end seems to suggest that the world has won and that the relationship has come to an end. And this line to me suggests that it hasn't come to an end purely because it has reached its full cycle and because we both decided that we now need to move on, but because there is an outside world, there are powers that be, there is a layer of power and of influence that now overbears. I have called this sequence, the Fair Youth sequence, play on passion, power and possession. And it seems to me that power is greater than mine and power is greater than the young man's are coming into this and are killing the passion. So much for today, and so much almost for the Fair Youth Sonnets. Next week I will be talking about the young man, and I'll be summarising a little bit what we've been through before we then move on to the Dark Lady Sonnets. So, while I can no longer say that we have any more of the Fair Youth Sonnets to look forward to, this really, very sadly, is it. We do have a completely different kind of poetry in exactly the same format to look forward to, addressed to a completely different kind of person, but very possibly overlapping very much with what we've just heard and been through and seen and read and experienced. So there's a whole separate adventure or separate part to the adventure to be enjoyed and cherished. And so remember, love is the power, and see you next week.